right, guys, Professor Davis here, and we are going to be looking at the chemistry of life and how it relates to biology. Now, this is going to be in a two-part series here. So when we do this little introduction here, we do need to make sure that we do cover some chemistry. Chemistry is a science that studies the composition of matter, and ultimately all living things are made of matter. So when we look at this, matter is anything that takes up space and has weight. We call that mass. This includes atoms that make up molecules from which cells are going to be made. And so this is why we need to talk a little bit about them, because remember, we looked at in the intro to biology that all living things are composed of cells, and these cells are going to ultimately include atoms. So remember, way back in grade school, you learned that there are three forms of matter that exist: solid, liquid, and gas. Right? So both living and non-living things have a chemical basis, and some parts of them have solid types of structures. Some are going to be more liquid and some are going to be gas. And these elements are going to be used in different ways by the living cell. Now, when we look at this, elements are the matter from which all other matter is made. Okay, so an element is going to be the matter from which all other matter is made. So when we look at elements, we use the periodic table to study them. The periodic table is universal in science, like we talked about Latin is with what we use for scientific naming. And there are 92 naturally occurring elements. Now, you may look at a periodic table and say, wait a minute, there's more than 92 on here. There's only 92 that are naturally made. The others are man-made in the lab. 6 of these make up 95% of an organism's body weight. Those 6 include carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur. However, they're important for all living organisms. Most matter contains more than one element. You have to have more than one element a lot of times to make up something. Sometimes it is one, but a lot of times you have to have more than one. Now, when we look at this, guys, it is important that you recognize the different atoms, but also how they are represented with their abbreviation. So carbon, guys, is represented with a C. Hydrogen is represented with an H. Nitrogen is N. Oxygen is O. Phosphorus is P. And sulfur is S. So if you take a look here at this periodic table, you should be able to find these based on the fact that they have those letters. Now, the name is also present, but if you look over here, number 8 is oxygen. This is going to be represented with the O, whereas nitrogen is number 7, carbon is number 6. So there's the periodic table. Now, I'm not going to ask you to memorize the periodic table. However, you should know how to use this table. So atoms of cells, when we look at this, the atomic components and the structure of elements that are important to our cells. So guys, an atom is the smallest unit of each element out there. Okay, so an element, the smallest unit that makes it up is called an atom. Atoms of an element have similar chemical and physical properties. So they're all pretty much the same. So all carbon atoms are about the same. All oxygen atoms are very close to the same. They have similar properties to them. Now, atoms do contain some subparticles, okay, some what we call subatomic particles. Now, you've heard about these before. We have protons. Protons are what the kind of orangish red ones in here look like in the nucleus of an atom. Now, do not get that confused with the nucleus of a cell. They are different. But the nucleus of the atom is going to be made of the protons, which are the positively charged particles, and the neutrons, which are kind of the yellowish color in here, which are the neutral particles. They are just there to supply weight. They don't have a charge. On the other hand, the electrons are outside of the nucleus. They go around in these little orbits, kind of orbiting them like a planet. We talk about like the moon orbiting the earth. Okay, this is what we see with those electrons. Electrons have a negative charge to them. Okay, so they have a negative charge. Protons have positive, electrons are negative. So if you just take a little closer look, this is what we see with the atom. Okay, all matter is composed of atoms. The nucleus contains the protons and the neutrons, and the electrons are on the outside in this kind of blue structure, and they have a negative charge. So each proton has a mass of 1. Okay, so each proton has a mass of 1, and it has, like I said, a positive charge. Each neutron also has a mass of 1. So if we were to look at this atom right here, there are 2 protons and there are 2 neutrons. And so if you add those together, we would see that they would have an atomic mass of 4. Okay, because 2 plus 2 is 4. Now, the electrons, they are so small that we don't calculate them in the mass. We don't add it to the mass. But one thing that is important with the electrons is they do have a negative charge. So let's look at these subatomic particles and put it kind of into a chart. One place for you to kind of see everything about them. So protons, we do see, are going to have an atomic mass of 1. Their charge is a positive charge, and they are located in the nucleus. The neutrons also have an atomic mass of 1. They have a 0 charge, meaning they're neutral. That's their name, the neutrons. And they are also found in the nucleus. Electrons technically have no mass. Now, really, they kind of do, but it's so small, we're not going to take it into account. They do have a negative charge to them, and they are found in the electron shell. Those are the orbitals outside of the nucleus. Now, when we look at this, guys, the majority of the atom is empty space. The nucleus is part of it, and then we have these orbitals around them. All atoms of the same element, guys, have the same number of protons. So when we talked about oxygen being number 8, that tells us there were 8 protons present. So the protons are known as the atomic number, which we'll talk about in a second. So looking at the electrons real quick before we move on, those electrons are found in shells or energy levels that are around the nucleus. They are also known as orbitals. Each orbital may hold up to 2 electrons. Now, when we look at this, first electron shell, okay, the very first one, the one closest to the nucleus, is going to hold a maximum of 2 electrons. That's all it can hold. Once 2 are in there, it's happy, and it's going to move the next electrons outward to the next shell. The second shell has 4 orbitals, and since it has 4 orbitals, 4 times 2 tells you that they can hold 8 electrons. Okay, so we talked about this. Each orbital can hold 2. The first shell only has 1, so it can hold a max of 2. The second shell has 4 orbitals, so if you can do 4 times 2, that gives you the 8. The third electron shell out from them, okay, so we have first, second, third. The third shell has 9 orbitals, and it could hold a max of, when we look at this, 18 electrons. Now, we are going to focus mostly on the 2 and the 8. Okay, because if you go into chemistry, you're going to go into a lot more detail about how these orbitals look and how they have certain shapes, and that's why some can hold 2, some can hold 8, some can hold 18. So we are going to focus just on the 2 and the 8. If an atom has only 1 electron shell, it is full when it has 2 electrons. Full, happy, it will not react with anything else. We're going to use the octet rule for both the second and the third energy levels. And we're going to say that if they have 8 in there, 8 valence electrons, then they're happy. They're not going to react with anything else. They are happy because they have 8. And that's why we call it the octet rule, because octet tells you that there are 8 of them. Now, it is a little more complex than what I'm telling you, but we're going to be very basic with this, okay, saying that there's 8 electrons. All right, so let's look at the periodic table or chart here. When you see on the periodic table, there are these little boxes, and inside those boxes, there's some information. The first set of information we want to look at is the letter. This letter right here, and sometimes it's 2 letters, but this is the abbreviation. This is known as the atomic symbol of the element. It represents the element's name. In this case, it's a C, and this represents carbon. There's also going to be 2 numbers in this chart. The first number, that is the smaller number, is the atomic number. This represents the number of protons that particular element or atom has. Okay, so in this case, carbon has 6 protons. It's its atomic number. We also see, though, that there's going to be a bigger number, and this is the atomic mass. Now remember, mass is calculated by adding up everything that had some weight, some atomic mass or weight. So remember, protons each have a mass of 1. Neutrons each have a mass of 1. So your atomic mass is going to equal the number of protons plus neutrons. Okay, so we see here that the atomic mass is protons plus neutrons. Now guys, if you have these 2 numbers, you know the total mass of protons and neutrons. You also know the number of protons. Could you calculate the number of neutrons? Well, yeah, it's basic math. Since I have a total of 12, and that 12 was protons, which I have 6, plus neutrons, I just do 12 minus 6, and that tells me how many neutrons I have. In this particular case, this carbon would have 6 neutrons. So you should know how to draw and or recognize atomic structures and elements, especially when we're looking at carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, because those are the 6 that are the most important. Now, the big thing when we're looking at is you need to look at the number of protons. Remember, that's the atomic number. You also need to look at the number of neutrons, which you're going to do the atomic mass minus the atomic number, and then the number of electrons. But wait a minute, I didn't tell you how to find electrons yet. Guys, when we're looking at atoms, atoms are neutral in their charge. So if I have, my atomic number is 6, and I have 6 positives, how many negatives do I have to have for it to equal 0? I have 6 positives. This means I need 6 negatives. So in this particular case, if I'm looking at an atom, like a carbon atom, a oxygen atom, the number of electrons is going to equal the number of protons. So these are some little rules that you can use to help remember. So atoms, again, have a neutral charge. Okay, in nature, they have a neutral charge. All right, so guys, if you look here, this is showing you carbon. This is a little box off the periodic table. So we have C, the symbol. We have then carbon. We have the 6, a smaller number. That is going to be the atomic number, telling you there are 6 protons. The larger number is 12 here, but you'll notice there is a decimal. Guys, sometimes the number of neutrons are different. And so because of that, on the periodic table, they give you an average. When we do an average, sometimes this also gives us a decimal. So number of protons. If the atomic number is 6, there are 6 for carbon. What about the number of electrons? If I have 6 positives, I should also have how many negatives? I should have 6. And then the number of neutrons. How do I find that? Well, I take the atomic mass, which in this case is 12, and I subtract the 6 protons I have for 6 neutrons. So 12 minus 6. So based on this little box, you have quite a bit of information that you can pull from. All right. And this is what it would look like if you were to kind of draw it out. So I've got 6 protons, which are the blue in the middle. I've got 6 neutrons, which are the little red ones in the middle. Those are all in the nucleus. Remember, they're found in the nucleus. We learned about that. We also see them in the orbitals. Remember, the first orbital can only hold 2 electrons. I have to have a total of 6. And so since I have 2 in the first shell, I'm going to have 4 in the second shell. Okay, so this is how we would draw the carbon atom. Now, is this carbon atom happy? When we talk about its shells, the first shell is happy because it has 2. But remember the second shell we talked about, that it only is really happy when it has 8 electrons, and this one only has 4. This allows carbon then to bond with other things, which we'll talk a little bit more in part 2. All right, so guys, if you take a look here, we have, looking again, the protons and neutrons in the nucleus. You then have the electron cloud, which is going to contain the electrons. And you can see the difference between the helium atom that only has 2 of everything versus the carbon atom that has 6 of everything. So let's take a look here at this periodic table. Guys, when we look at this, you do see that the atomic number is the number of protons. Okay, so it's going to be the number of protons that are present. For hydrogen, the atomic number is 1, so there is 1 proton. We also see that when we look at this too, that depending on which group it's part of, it tells you how many electrons are in the outer shell. So if this is group, if you put C1V, IV, that's the Roman numeral for 4. So carbon is in group 4, therefore it has 4 valence electrons. Nitrogen is group 5, which means it has 5 valence electrons. Oxygen's in group 6. It has 6 valence electrons. So the group or column, okay, that number there and that Roman numeral will tell you how many electrons are in the outer shell. We also see that the atomic mass is going to equal the protons plus neutrons. So in the case of helium, there are 4. When we look at the idea of protons plus neutrons, if I look at the atomic number, there are 2. So 4 minus 2 tell me that I have 2 neutrons. So guys, the rows tell you how many shells surround the nucleus. Okay, so if they're in row 2, there are 2 shells that surround the nucleus. If they're in row 3, they have 3 shells that surround the nucleus. So the column number tells you how many electrons are in the outer shell. So let's look at carbon, okay, specifically carbon. Carbon is in the second row. This means it has 2 shells, outer shells around the nucleus. It is also in column 4, which tells you that it has 4 electrons in its outer shell. All right, so what about sodium? So if I'm looking at sodium, we do see that it has 11 protons. You see the 11 there? That's the atomic number, so it has 11 protons, okay? It also has, though, here 12 neutrons. Now, how did we find that? Okay, if we look at sodium, it is 22.99 as its atomic mass. Okay, well, that rounds up to 23. Okay, we can't have 0.99. It rounds up to 23. So what is 23 minus 11? 23 minus 11 equals 12 neutrons. Now remember, we want atoms to be neutral. So if I have 11 protons, those are positive. How many electrons do I need? I will have to have 11 electrons. I have to have 11 electrons. Okay, so this is how we find out the different components. The atomic number tells me the protons. The atomic mass is going to help me get the neutrons because I can do the atomic mass minus the atomic number. And the number of electrons is going to be determined when we look at the fact that it is a neutral atom. If I have 11 positives, I also have to have 11 negatives. Now they are in row 3, therefore they have 3 shells. And the outer shell only has 1 electron because it is in column 1. Okay. All right. What about Br? Bromide. Okay. When we look at bromide, let's look at Br. So find Br on here. Okay. When we look at Br, the atomic number, the smaller number, tells you the number of protons. This one would be 35. So there are 35 protons. How do I find the number of neutrons? Well, I have to take the atomic mass and subtract the atomic number. In this case, the atomic mass is 79.9, so we're going to round that up to 80. And we're going to see that the atomic number is 35. So we're going to do 80 minus 35. When we do 80 minus 35, you get 45 neutrons. So when you look at this, they don't always have to be the same with protons and neutrons. It's based on the atomic mass, the weight. Now, I do have 35 positives, 35 protons. So if I have 35 positives, how many negatives do I have to have? Remember, they need to be neutral, so I have to have 35 electrons. Now, this one is in row 4. Since it's in row 4, it has 4 shells. It is also going to be in column number 7. Since it's in column number 7, up and down, it's going to have 7 electrons in its outer shell. Okay, so this is how you use the periodic table. All right, so let's look at atomic structure of some of the elements. So the number of protons, electrons, and neutrons, they're not always the same. That's important to note. Okay, but we're going to look at some examples. All right, so this first one I have is hydrogen. Hydrogen has 1 as its atomic number and 1 as its atomic mass. So if we were to look at this, protons are 1, electrons are 1 because 1 positive, 1 negative, but neutrons are 0 because what's 1 minus 1? 0. So there's no neutrons in a hydrogen atom, or at least this one. All right, let's look at nitrogen here, this N for nitrogen. The smaller number, remember, is the atomic number, which tells you that is the number of protons. In this case, that is 7. Since I have 7 positives, I also have to have 7 negatives. So that's going to be the electrons. There are 7 electrons. Now, for neutrons, I have to do the atomic mass, which is 14 here, minus 7. 14 minus 7 is 7. In this case, they are all the same. 7 protons, 7 electrons, and 7 neutrons. Okay, what about oxygen over here? Oxygen has atomic number of 8. It has an atomic mass of 16. This one also has the same for each of them. So protons are 8 because that's the atomic number. Since I have 8 positives, I need 8 negatives. That's going to show me the electrons. And then 16 minus 8 gives me the neutrons. Okay, so this is just a review to make sure that you can do this. So some important concepts, guys, with this. The electrons are associated with energy. Each of these shells, these orbitals, have energy in them. And the further we get away from the nucleus, the more energy there is. Okay, the further away we get, the more freedom they have. And so because of that, they move more and they have a lot more energy. So electrons in the outer shell have the most we call potential energy. This means it's stored energy that could be used for something. They're getting anxious and they could use this energy for something. Now, it is important to keep track of the number of electrons in that outer shell. This is because those number of electrons that are in the outer shell are going to determine how reactive the atom is. Does the atom bond or react with other atoms? Does it react or bond with other elements? Atoms that do not have a complete outer shell, okay, they don't have that outer shell full with the 8 electrons that they need, they will react with others because they want to complete their outer shell. They want a complete set. Okay, so they're going to react with this. So guys, which atom is reactive? If we look at our 2 examples here, in A, there's only 5 in the outer shell. Okay, but in B, there are 8. So in this particular case, A is the more reactive because it still needs 3 more in its outer shell. So why is A more reactive? It wants to fill that outer shell. B has enough. It doesn't have to react. It has everything it needs. Okay, so this gives you an example. Now, with this, guys, atoms can either give up electrons, they can accept electrons, or they can share electrons. All 3 of these ways could help them complete their outer shell, and this would make them happy because they're full and happy if they have 8. So which atom will most likely give up an electron out of my 2 examples here with A, B, and C? Well, guys, it depends on how many are in that outer shell. Okay, if you look at A, there's only 1. Is it going to be easier to give 1 away or to get 7 more? It's going to be easier to give 1 away. Whereas if you look at B, it has 7, it only needs 1. It's going to be easier to get 1 than to give 7 away. And C, guys, they're already sharing. So that's not going to happen. So which atom will most likely give up an electron? That would be A. And which atom would most likely accept the electron? In this case, it would be B. Okay, because again, it wants to make that outer shell happy with 8. So which elements of atom have atoms that are what we call inert, non-reactive elements? Well, guys, these are the ones who have 8 electrons already. They don't need any help getting them. So these are known as the noble gases. And if you look at them, they are in column 8, which tells you they have 8 electrons in that outer shell. These noble gases are things like helium, neon, argon, those sort of things. Okay. Now, why are they considered inert, meaning they don't react? Well, they have a complete outer shell. They already have all the electrons they need, so they do not have to react with anything else. So guys, we talked about that atoms are neutrally charged, meaning the number of protons and the number of electrons equal each other. So if I have 7 positives, I should have 7 negatives. If I have 15 positives, I should have 15 negatives. Okay, those are for atoms. So if you see here, it says a sodium atom. A sodium atom has 11 protons. Therefore, if you count them up, they also have 11 electrons. But guys, if some of these atoms give away an electron or they accept an electron, they're no longer neutral. They either gave away a negative or they got another negative. So if these become what we call charged atoms, meaning that they have a charge, they either have a positive charge or a negative charge, they're no longer atoms, they are called ions. In ions, the number of protons do not equal the number of electrons. So guys, if we look at this picture of sodium, remember that sodium only has a 1 in its outer shell, and it would be really easy for it to give that electron away. If it gives that electron away, it still has 11 positives, but now it has 10 negatives. Since I have one more positive, this is why we write it in a plus. It has one extra positive, so it is a sodium ion. Okay, so if you see that it's an ion, it means it's charged. And it's going to tell you how many extra positives or negatives it has. In this case, because there's just a plus sign, it has one extra positive. Another thing that could also be different based on these guys is if they have a different number of neutrons. Now, atoms of the same element have to have the same number of protons. But we saw earlier they do not have to have the same number of neutrons. If they have different numbers of neutrons, they are known as isotopes. Okay, and I'm going to show you a picture of those in a second. So here's an example of a carbon isotope. Now, if you look at these, all of the carbons, whether it's carbon 12, carbon 13, or carbon 14, they all have 6 protons because that's what makes them carbon. In this case as well, there's no positives or negatives shown here, so they all have 6 electrons. The thing that is different in these carbons is the number of neutrons. In carbon 12, that's the mass. 12 minus 6 gives you 6 neutrons. But in carbon 13, the mass is 13, so 13 minus 6 is going to give you 7 neutrons. And in carbon 14, if we subtract 6, we get 8 neutrons. So guys, these are all carbon atoms, but they weigh different. Some of them are heavier than others. Guys, this is why they have decimals in there. When they have that decimal where it was like 12.0 whatever, that told you 12 is the most common carbon, but there are some carbon 13s and some carbon 14s out there. Okay, so this is why in the periodic table, the atomic mass a lot of times is represented by a decimal, because it's the average of all the different masses, number of neutrons that could be different in all of the different atoms. Now, why are isotopes important? Some isotopes are known as being radioactive because they're extra heavy. They're not balanced like we see with a lot of the other types of atoms. We do see that they can become unstable. And these unstable isotopes could be used for traces, okay, like to trace something or to treat cancer. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we use these. So uses for radioactive isotopes, we see the lower levels could be used for traces in research. They'll use them a lot of times to tag different things so that they can find them. Nuclear medicine also uses radioactive isotopes, or in certain lab tests. If you've ever had, like, especially if you've had a test to test your thyroid out, they make you drink this kind of gross medicine stuff that has radioactive isotopes in it so that when they do the scan, they actually can light that stuff up. Okay, so they can see it. Now, high levels, when we look at high levels of radioactive isotopes, they can damage things. And so they are going to be used to sterilize medical equipment, and that's to kill off anything that could contaminate the medical equipment. So like all those utensils they use in surgeries that are metal and all that they want to reuse, they will sterilize them using radioactive isotopes to kill anything that's on them. Also, cancer treatments. We use radioactive isotopes, okay, when they do radiation to treat those cancer cells. We're trying to kill the cancer cells. And also, they can use this radioactive isotopes to neutralize anthrax spores. Anthrax is a very deadly type of bacteria that can live in spores, which means a lot of stuff can't kill it. And it was mailed to high-level officials at the Pentagon at one time. And so it was deadly, and they want a way to help irradiate it, so get rid of it. So when we look at this too, another thing could be used as tracing. So aging of artifacts, they use what we call carbon dating or C14 dating. With carbon dating, guys, is all living things contain a certain amount of carbon. And when a living thing dies, that carbon starts to decay at a certain rate. So depending on how much of that carbon 14 is left in that organism that was found, we could calculate how long ago it died. Okay, so we could calculate how long ago it died. And this is what they talk about with carbon dating. All right, so this brings us to the idea of bonding. How do atoms bond and form what we call molecules? So when we look at bonding, guys, we have to look at some terms here. The first term is molecule. Molecule is when there are two or more atoms chemically reacted or bonded together. So two or more atoms chemically bonded together. However, another term we need to know is compound. A compound is when two or more different elements chemically bond together. So there is a difference. Not all molecules are compounds, but all compounds are molecules. Guys, it's kind of like looking at the definition of a rectangle and a square. Rectangles say that they are shapes that have four sides. Okay? Four sides. However, if the four sides are equal, they are called a square. Okay? So you kind of have the same thing here. If we have two things bonded together, it doesn't matter what they are definitely a molecule. But if those two things are different, they are also a compound. So, I've got some listed here. Are these atoms, compounds, or molecules? So in our first case, I have just a C, one C. Since I have one C, this is an atom. Okay, because molecules are two or more things bound together, and compounds are two or more different things. So C is just an atom. What about O2? This is an oxygen. We call it an oxygen molecule. Now, I have two things bonded together, but they're not different. They're two oxygens. So this is a molecule. What about H2O? I've got two hydrogens and one oxygen. This is known as a compound. You could also call it a molecule. What about H by itself? H by itself would be an atom. Okay, the next one's methane gas. This is CH4. I have one C and four H's. Since they are different and there's two or more, this is a compound. And then last but not least, I have NaCl. This is table salt. It's sodium Na bonded with chlorine Cl. Since they are different, this is a compound. Okay, so this is just to give you some examples. Now, atoms can give up, remember? They can give up electrons, they can accept electrons, or they can share electrons. Okay, so they're going to share them in this outer shell. So the first kind of bond we want to talk about is an ionic bond. An ionic bond occurs when there is a transfer of elements from one atom to another. So I'm going to either give an electron away or I'm going to accept an electron. One of the best examples of this is table salt, sodium chloride, NaCl. So remember we talked about Na, sodium, has one in its outer shell. Chlorine, on the other hand, has 7 in its outer shell. So chlorine needs only one more to be happy. And sodium, if it gave up its one, it would be happy. So what sodium says is it says, okay, hey, chlorine, I will give you my electron. And chlorine says, well, thanks. But since sodium gave away a negative, sodium is now positive, Na plus. And chlorine accepted the negative. It took an extra electron. Therefore, it becomes Cl negative. Now, in ionic bonds, positives and negatives, they're opposites. They are now going to attract. Opposites attract. Just like we see on like magnets where the north and south poles attract, opposites attract here. So positive and negative, they're going to attract. Now, both of these atoms are full and happy, so they are stable. So if we look here, guys, sodium has 11 protons, and it is going to then have also 11 electrons, except we are going to give one away. So that 11 goes down to 10. Since I have 11 positives still, this means I have an extra positive. Chlorine, on the other hand, had 17 electrons. It gained one. Now it has 18. So this is why it has one extra negative, allowing them now to be positive and negative and attract to each other. This is called an ionic bond. And it's an ionic bond because it forms ions. Remember we said ions are charged atoms. The next type of bond we want to talk about are covalent bonds. Covalent bonds occur when two atoms are going to share electrons. I'm not going to give it away and I'm not going to take it, but I'm going to share it with another atom. These are very strong bonds. Okay, sharing here is a very strong bond. It takes a lot of energy to break these types of bonds. However, do they always share equally? The answer is no. Okay, but if they do share equally, they are known as non-polar covalent bonds. There's no poles because a pole is like a north and a south. They're opposites that are made. There's not any here. They are sharing equally. These are going to be represented with a line between those electrons. So in this case, guys, we see hydrogen bonding with another hydrogen. This creates what we call a hydrogen molecule. They are sharing one pair of electrons. Now, pair means there's two. They're sharing them. And we represent them with a line in between the two H's. So you have H line H. That is going to be a hydrogen molecule. And this is a single one because they're only sharing one pair. Here, though, guys, is oxygen. Oxygen can share two pairs of electrons. So we represent this with a double line. This is known as an oxygen molecule. Nitrogen can share three pairs. So we can represent it with a triple bond. Three lines, because they're sharing three pairs. And this is a nitrogen molecule. Triple covalent bond. However, here's another one. This is carbon, and it's bonding with four hydrogens. Each hydrogen is sharing a pair with the carbon. So we see carbon in the middle with a line attached to each hydrogen. So guys, this formed four single covalent bonds. Four single covalent bonds because they're represented with a single line. All right. And guys, all of these, they're all sharing equally. They're all sharing equally here. So they are non-polar. So we all know sharing is hard. And sharing is hard because of the fact that those electrons are not always going to be in a specific area the same amount of time. All right. If the two atoms are very equal in size, they do share a lot better than if one atom is a lot bigger than the other. When they don't share equally, this creates something called electronegativity. This is where the attractive forces that an atomic nucleus exerts on the electrons pulls the electrons maybe more often. And so they may spend more time with one atom versus the other. Now, this depends on the number of protons and the distance between the nucleus and the electrons. There's a lot of factors, and it's kind of like gravity. Sometimes the nucleus pulls the electrons more often because it has a higher gravity to it. Now, an unequal sharing of electrons is still a covalent bond, but we call it a polar covalent bond. This is because it creates kind of a negative side of the atom. This creates a negative side of the molecular compound and a positive side. You can see this in water. Water is one of the best examples of this. And this is why water has its very characteristic Mickey Mouse shape that you see here. The oxygen is the larger of the atoms and the hydrogens are smaller. Each hydrogen is sharing a pair of electrons with oxygen, but the electrons spend more time with the oxygen because it's bigger. Because they spend more time with the oxygen has a slightly negative charge. So the oxygen has a slightly negative charge. Whereas the hydrogens, because they don't have the electrons as often, have a slightly positive charge. Again, this is what creates that pull. I have a slightly negative charge at the oxygen, a slightly positive charge at the hydrogen. Now guys, this is super important. This idea of creating poles and this electronegativity of water is what gives water a lot of its properties that we're going to talk about in a minute. So polar covalent bonds are when they do not share equally. So ionic and covalent bonds, they happen between elements and atoms. But hydrogen bonds happen between molecules. So if you look here, you have a bunch of water molecules kind of near each other, and they actually have a bond forming between them. Remember we talked about how one of the oxygens, the red guys here, have a slightly negative charge, but the hydrogens, they have a slightly positive charge. So an oxygen here is slightly attracted to the hydrogen on a different water molecule. And this creates a set of bonding that are called hydrogen bonds. Now, hydrogen bonds, guys, are not very strong, but they can have strength in what we call numbers if there's a bunch of them there. Now, because water has that polar covalent bonding, hydrogen bonding is formed between the water molecules. Hydrogen atoms in one water molecule are attracted to the oxygen atoms in another. These attractive forces are weak when you compare them to ionic and covalent. They are a lot easier to break, so we represent them with dotted lines. But the more you have, the stronger it gets. So the more water you have, the stronger those bonds are. Okay, so this is a good example of hydrogen bonds. Another molecule that has a lot of these hydrogen bonds that we utilize in our cells besides water is DNA. So hydrogen bonds are really important. So here's a little kind of quiz about name that bond. So I have 4 examples of bonds here, and we're going to see which one goes with which. All right, so if we look at number 1, they are sharing electrons, and they are sharing them equally because there's no charges on them. Okay, except for the protons and the electrons. And so because they're sharing and it's equal sharing, these are non-polar covalent bonds. Okay, non-polar covalent bonds. So when we look at number 2, there are 2 types of bonds that are present here. Okay, if we're looking at it going between the hydrogen and the nitrogen, that's a non-polar covalent bond. Okay, it's one line. There's no kind of negative or positive shown here, so it's a non-polar covalent bond. At the bottom of this one, you see the dotted lines, and those are going to be hydrogen bonds. Okay, so at the bottom down there, you have the hydrogen bonds, the dotted lines. Now for number 3 over here, we see that an electron was transferred. Since the electron was transferred, and now I have a Na positive and a Cl negative, this is an ionic bond. And then number 4, they are sharing. You can't see the electrons, but they are sharing. But one side, the oxygen side, is slightly negative, and the hydrogen sides are slightly positive. In this case, you are looking at a polar covalent bond. All right, so this brings us to chemical formulas. Chemical formulas and equations, these help us keep track of the atoms going into and out of a chemical reaction. In these bonds that we've been talking about, we have to keep track. However many go in have to come out on the other side. So reactants are what go into a chemical reaction, and products are what come out of a chemical reaction. The arrow always points towards the products. So an arrow always points towards the products. Now the number of atoms of each element must be the same on the reactant side and on the product side in order for it to have a balanced equation. Okay, so in order for it to have a balanced equation, you have to have the same number. So let's kind of take a look at this, okay? If we look at the reactants, it has 6 oxygen. Okay, see the 6 in front of the C? This tells us there are 6 oxygen, do you see the 6 in front of the C? This tells us there are 6 carbon. So in the reactant side, I have 6 carbon. Hydrogen, I have 6 in front of the H, but there's also a 2. So what is 6 times 2? That's 12. 12 hydrogen. Oxygen, on the other hand, we see that there are 6 times 2, which is 12, plus 6 more, which gives you 18. So on the reactant side, I have 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, and 18 oxygen. So now let's look at the product side. On the product side, I still have 6 carbon. I also still have 12 hydrogen. And if you calculate it, you will also see that there are still 18 oxygen because you have 6. Then you have to add that to 6 times 2, which is 12. 6 plus 12 is 18. All right, so this is showing you these different sides of reactants versus products. Now, what cellular process is represented up here? I'm taking carbon dioxide and water, and something's being made into sugar and oxygen. Guys, this is something else we're going to see in a different lecture, and this is known as photosynthesis. Plants are able to do this. They take carbon dioxide and water with sunlight, and they make their own food, and they give off oxygen. All right, so this brings us to water. I want to talk to you about the properties of water. So living things are mostly made up of water. 70 to 90% of a living thing is made up of water. So the chemical properties of water are essential to understand how life works and for life to be successful. Now, water's not living, but it is something important for something that is living. Now, many important properties of water are due to the presence of those hydrogen bonds that we talked about, as well as the fact that they make polar covalent bonds. Those two main things about bonding help give the properties of water. So let's look at the first property. The first property of water is that water molecules stick together. Water molecules stick together. Now, this is because of those hydrogen bonds we talked about. So when water molecules stick together, it's called cohesiveness or cohesion. If they stick to a surface like your car or your water bottle or your skin, that means they are adhesive. Those two things together, they make up the same property, the fact that they stick to each other. The benefits of this is it makes water excellent transport media within our blood, like for us, or within plants, so that they can move that water up against gravity. This also causes there to be a high buildup of surface tension, and that surface tension is due to that cohesion. Okay, so you can kind of see here how they are all attached to each other. It makes this cohesion take place, surface tension. Have you ever filled up a cup and it got to be where it was a certain height and you just knew it was going to overflow? Like if you were filling up a cup with water or soda or something like that, but it just made a bubble on top. That bubble was due to surface tension. There's like this trend going around on like TikTok and social media and stuff where they have a bottle or a container and the person has to add water a little at a time and they're waiting for the one for it to overflow. The fact that they can keep adding water and it creates almost like a bubble on top for a while is because of this surface tension. This idea that water molecules stick together. Also, since water molecules stick together, this is why some organisms like these little bugs can stand on water. It creates almost like a film and they can stand on top of it because they're not heavy enough to break those bonds. Now, you are too heavy. You cannot stand on that and water holds you up. But these little insects can. Okay, they're able to stand on the water. So guys, benefits when we talk about this idea of cohesion, adhesion, and surface tension, it makes them excellent transport media within our blood, like you can see down here, and also within plants, making sure we can move the water from the roots where they get it up to the leaves where photosynthesis takes place. Another thing that water does is water warms and cools very slowly. This is due to water's high heat of vaporization and high heat capacity. Now, what does this mean? Water has a very high heat, specific heat, and this means that the amount of heat energy required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water, 1 degree Celsius, is a lot. So it takes a lot to heat water up, and then in turn it takes a while for it to cool down. Now this is good for us, okay? Because if water heated up really fast, when it's really hot outside and you go outside, you're 70 to 90% water, your water would start boiling and you'd boil from the inside out. Or if it's a really cold day, if it cooled down really fast, you would go outside and the water in your body would freeze like ice. We don't want that. Okay? It cools slowly, it heats slowly. But guys, this is also why you ever had a pool and you fill the pool up at the beginning of summer, and even though sunlight's hitting it, it takes a long time for it to heat up unless you have a heater on that pool. And that's because it takes a lot of energy to heat that water up. About this time of year now, it's probably pretty warm. Okay, but it takes a long time to heat up. It takes a long time to cool down. So what benefits does this have? This prevents rapid change in temperature of water. This helps moderate our Earth's temperatures. Okay, so it helps moderate our temperatures on Earth. It also prevents rapid change in your body temperature, even though it may feel so hot outside. The fact that your water doesn't start boiling is a good thing. Okay, and so it prevents rapid change in your body temperature. The third property of water is that water dissolves all other polar substances. So in other words, it's a really good, what we would call solvent. A solvent is something that dissolves things. So one way is it makes solutions like salt water. You can dissolve salt into water. If you add too much salt to the water, can you take that salt back out? Nope. If you're cooking, you'll just have to start over. Throw that water out and start another one over because you can't remove it because it's dissolved it. Those types of molecules that dissolve in water are called hydrophilic, meaning they love water. They love it. And since they love water, they dissolve in it. Hydro means water, philic means to love. On the other hand, there are some molecules who do not like water. They are water-fearing. This means they are hydrophobic. Hydrophobic molecules are fats like oils. If you notice, if you were to put oil into water, it separates. That's because that oil is hydrophobic. So what's the benefit of it being a really good solvent and it does dissolve a lot of things? A lot of things are hydrophilic. Well, it facilitates a lot of our chemical reactions. Chemical reactions can be done faster if things are dissolved in water. The last thing we want to look at that is the property of water is that frozen water, when water does finally freeze and it turns solid into ice, it is actually less dense than liquid water. This means that ice floats. Now, this is good because it serves as insulation, preventing aquatic life from freezing. Okay, if you'll notice that the top of the river or lake or whatever is frozen, but underneath the water is still liquid. It acts as an insulator. We don't see that a lake freezes solid all the way through because if it did, it would kill all of the fish that are in there. They wouldn't just be frozen and then when it thawed, they come back to life. That's not how that works. Because this is also why you can go ice fishing. Have you ever seen an ice fishing where they go and they cut a hole? They take out several, maybe even a foot of ice. Underneath it is liquid water and you could still fish. But guys, if you leave that open for a longer period of time and you're not actually using it and the water's not moving too much, it will refreeze, creating that insulation that is present. Okay, so frozen water is less dense, which means it floats. All right, the last thing we're going to talk about in this particular video is we're going to look at acids, bases, and pHs. This does deal with water. This deals with the fact that things do dissolve in water, water being a good solvent. So when water dissociates or ionizes substances, they separate. And when they separate, they may create acids or bases. So if we look at acids, acids release extra hydrogens. So when it gets added to water, they release these extra hydrogen ions, H+, because the plus tells you it's an ion, meaning it has a positive charge. So in the example here is HCl, which is hydrochloric acid. It dissociates in the water because of that H that's there. So this becomes acidic. The next example, though, is NaOH. When this sodium hydroxide gets dropped into water, it dissociates, but we see that it's going to dissociate into sodium plus and OH minus. That OH minus is a hydroxyl ion. It's still an ion because it has a charge to it. It's a negative charge, and this is what makes something basic. It's not acidic. It's what we would call basic or alkaline. Now, in water, there's normally equal number of these. The hydroxyl ion is the OH, the hydrogen ion is the H, and technically if you added those together, that is water, H2O. And normally when water kind of gets split up or ionizes, it's equal. They come in equal numbers. The problem is when they're not in equal numbers, that's when you get something that's acidic or basic. Now, if we look at this other example, sodium chloride, which is table salt, NaCl, when it dissociates, it dissociates into Na and Cl, but there's no hydrogen. ions and there's no hydroxyl ions. So this is just known as a salt solution. Now, there are ways to indicate the concentration of hydrogen ions as well as hydroxide ions. This is known as the pH scale. Now, the pH scale runs from 0 to 14, and each step is 10 times stronger than the step before. Okay? And so if we look, if anything is below 7, it's going to have a certain pH. If it's above 7, it's going to have a certain pH. And if it's right at 7, that is what's known as neutral. So a solution at a pH of 7 is known as neutral. Now, when we move from 7 either direction, it's going to be 10 times that direction. So if we look here, pH of 1 has 10 times 10 to the 1, more hydrogen ions than pH 2. pH 1 has 100 times because it's 2 steps. And it's 10 times, so it has to have 2 zeros, 100 times. Okay, stronger than a pH of 3. pH of 1 is 3 steps away from a pH of 4, so this is 1,000 times. Okay, because it has to have 3 zeros because it's 3 steps. Okay, so there's a big difference between 1 and 4. Okay, when we're looking at this, it's 1,000 times difference. So if it's at 7, it's neutral. If the solution has a pH less than 7, it's going to have an acidic pH. This means it has more hydrogens than hydroxides. If the solution has a pH more than 7, it is what we call basic. This means it has more hydroxide, OH, than hydrogen ions. Now guys, a basic solution can also be known as an alkaline solution. All right, so if we know that 7 is neutral, below 7 is an acid, above 7 is basic, you should be able to tell me if something is acidic, basic, or neutral. So let's look at blood plasma. So blood plasma, if we look for human blood, where is it located on this little chart? If we look for blood plasma, it is above 7. Since it is above 7, it is slightly basic. It's only a little bit above 7 because it's not even quite 8, but it is basic. What about gastric juices or fluids? Gastric juices are things like stomach acid and hydrochloric acid. Where are those located? Well, they're way down there on the acidic side, and so they are going to be acidic. All right, what about urine? Where's urine at on here? If we look, urine is right about 6. So if we're looking at the idea of urine being at 6, it's still below 7, so it is also acidic, usually. Sometimes it can be basic. So let's look at pure water. Pure water is right here at 7. Remember that 7 is the only pH that is neutral. So guys, most organisms must maintain a specific pH. Okay, now this pH might be different depending on which part of the body we're looking at or something like that, but they need to maintain a certain pH. This means though that because they come in contact with acids or bases or other solutions that are not that same pH, they need something that helps neutralize it. And these are known as buffers. Buffers help resist or prevent a pH change. Okay, so they can either take up extra hydrogens or they can take up extra OHs in order to make sure that this pH stays constant. This is part of that idea of homeostasis, making sure that it stays constant or the same. For example, in human blood, blood has to maintain the pH value of about 7.35. That's what it likes, that's what it prefers. Now, this is in spite of the fact that you take in all kinds of food that is not that pH. When you drink certain things like sodas, it's very acidic, or limes and lemons, tomatoes, all very acidic. And so what you eat could ultimately influence your blood. However, when you have that, you have buffers who help with it. Another is ingestion. When you have ingestion, you eat something, your stomach is going to secrete acid. If it secretes too much acid, it causes you discomfort, and we call that reflux or heartburn or indigestion. If we want relief, you take something like a bicarbonate soda, or like a Tums or a Rolade, Those are all examples of a buffer. You're trying to help neutralize the stomach acid. Other ways our body can help us maintain pH is exhaling more CO2 from our lungs. This is going to be getting rid of extra acids, because when we breathe out, CO2 is an acid in our blood, or elimination of extra H pluses from our kidneys. And this is what normally makes our urine acidic. Now, what does this idea of acids and bases, not only does it have on our body and other animals or other organisms for homeostasis, what about the ecosystem? Okay, when we look at the ecosystem, the non-living and living things, well, they can be affected because of acid deposition, where acid is deposited into the environment. Now, deforestation and burning of fossil fuels increases CO2. And remember, I told you CO2, when you breathe it out of your lungs, it was acidic. It also puts a bunch of sulfur dioxide into the air, which is also acidic. When that gets added to water, it creates what we call acid precipitation or acid rain. Could also be acid snow. Now, guys, this pH is not so acidic that when you go outside in acid rain, like it would melt your skin or burn your skin. It's not like that. However, the acid, if it is going to be acid rain less than 5 pH, it could affect plant growth. It could cause problems in lakes for the aquatic life like fish and algae and other plants. It could cause health issues on us and causing asthma to take place. And it could corrode, wear off buildings and vehicles, the paint on your car. Okay, so there are some things that could be an issue. So here's an example. This is where acid rain has affected the plant growth. In the top little picture in the corner, plant growth is very luscious. There's a lot of it, but now not so much. And that has to do with the acid rain and the acid being in the soil. We can also see where acid rain damage can happen here, where it's killing off a lot of those plants or where it's very damaged in areas. We see that for aquatic life is the acidity of the lake could kill the fish. You can see the fish that are dead here. Acid rain can also affect statues like marble statues. If you look before acid rain, you have this statue of George Washington, very clean, not all cracked or anything like that. But when we look at marble or limestone, when acid rain comes in contact, it dissolves it, and so it's cracking it and it's losing its details. The same thing over here in this picture, okay, where we have the statue of the woman. She did used to have a detailed face and detailed in her garments, but not so much anymore. And this is due to that acid rain. So this is just to give you some examples. All right, so this finishes up chapter 2, part 1. Okay, this finishes up our chemistry, part 1. We will do a part 2 coming up. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know.